Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for coming out to today's event. I'm Felicity Baker, a video news manager for the Office of News and Communications, and previously I have been working as a television news reporter in North Carolina. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the 6th installment of Duke's discussion series, examining issues that are going to be impacting the upcoming midterm elections. Now, as you may know, we're now less than 2 weeks away from Election Day on November 4th. Today, officially begins early voting here in North Carolina. And I'm sure you guys have not seen any political ads for elections or anything like that on TV. So with that in mind, we're going to be taking a look at a topic that's right here in our own backyard, North Carolina. And I'm pleased to be joined by 3 gentlemen, 2 here and 1 in Washington, D.C. with extensive experience in North Carolina politics. Here with me at Duke are Mac McCorkle and Frank Hill. Mac McCorkle has served as an issues consultant to political candidates, state governments, and various organizations for the last 2 decades. Since starting McCorkle Policy Consulting in 1994, he's worked for state and federal candidates in North Carolina, as well as 28 other states. He graduated from Duke Law School with honors, clerked on the United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit, and practiced law for a number of years in Raleigh with the firm founded by former Duke President Terry Sanford. And Frank is the director of the Institute for Public Trust in Charlotte, an organization dedicated to recruiting and training people to enter elective politics. He has a religion degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and received an MBA from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke in 1983. He was chief of staff to former Congressman Alex McMillan of North Carolina's 9th Congressional District and Senator Elizabeth Dole, a Republican senator from North Carolina. And at Duke in Washington, we're joined by Jim McCleskey, the president of McCleskey Associates. Jim is a 1985 graduate of Duke University. He was appointed by former Governor Hunt as the director of North Carolina Washington office and reappointed by Governors Easley and Perdue. As director of NCWO, Jim worked with the North Carolina Congressional Delegation, the White House, assorted federal agencies, numerous other governor's offices, and many businesses and communities on the full range of federal affairs matters that are facing the state. So obviously today we have quite a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, can you give me a status update on the races? Who's up, who's down? What are the tight races on both the state and federal level? If we can, we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll go ahead.
Well, obviously, I guess most people are looking at the Hagan-Tillis race, which is of national import, and it's obviously very, very close. All we seem to know is it looks like that Hagan may be holding on to a slim lead, but a lot will be told probably in the last 2 weeks. The Democrats in the state legislative level seem to have some real opportunities in especially in Wake County and around Asheville, for maybe some pickups there. And the state judicial races should be close. The Supreme Court races should be close. So those are the 3 that I think I'm watching and that most people watch. But I don't know that it's going to be a strong Republican win this year. But the wind is in favor of the Republicans. So if the Democrats do well here, it'll be because of a countervailing wind that really has a lot to do with displeasure and discontent about what the General Assembly and Governor McCorkle have been up to.
Well, it's pretty well known now that North Carolina is going to set another record for the most expensive Senate race. I think it's $103 million this year, which according to, except for California, some of the bigger states, on an inflation-adjusted basis, it's just absolutely astronomical. I started out in 1984 with the Hunt and Helms race, and we thought that was expensive, and then the Dole Bowles race was expensive, and this is just eclipsed it all. It seems to be pretty tight. From what I hear, it's going to wind up being one of these get out the vote type of efforts. It's a question of whether Kay Hagan's going to be able to assemble the Obama get out the vote effort in any kind of way. It's also the question of who's intensely interested in voting. Tom Tillis is trying to pull in the Tea Party people and the social conservative people to have some energy, but like I said, you can start voting today, and it's going to be interesting to get to that. That's the main thing that I hear from everybody at the national level is a lot's going to happen in the Senate, depending upon what happens in North Carolina.
And Jim, what are your thoughts? Top races?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me here today. It is terrific to be a part of this conversation. I feel like from the folks in this room here, any given member of this esteemed group could be sitting in the chair I'm in right now, and it's great to be with all of you. Frank and Mac are both longtime friends, and I really admire both of them. They're true professionals. It's great to be here. I will just repeat and touch on a little of what each of them said. That 84 Hunt Helms race at the time was the most expensive Senate race in the history of the country. That was exceeded 2 years later in California, but here we are again, and we are north of $100 million. I was on the Hill yesterday and realized that in a city of expensive real estate, the Russell, Dirksen, and Hart buildings are some of the most expensive places to get into anywhere on the planet. And clearly that's having a huge impact in the state. I'm sure everybody who's watching and listening to this is just about sick and tired of the television ads. At least in our state, they'll be over soon. I think in some other places they may continue for a while till things really shake out in a few runoffs. I think in terms of a couple of points that Mac touched on and that Frank alluded to, it's really been interesting in this Senate race that it has not so far, and we're finding out, I think, literally in real time right now whether this is changing, but it's not become a nationalized race. It's very much a North Carolina race. I think that's fundamentally a healthy thing. But that said, the issues around ISIL and around Ebola do remind us all that we do live in a dangerous world, which is always true. And North Carolina being a national security-oriented state, a military-oriented state, that's always on the minds of a significant chunk of folks who are probably pretty likely to vote. In terms of particularly tight races around the state, I don't think any of us expect control of the General Assembly to shift. That would be a big surprise, probably a bridge too far for the Democrats. In our delegation congressionally, I don't think we expect big changes. We know that the 7th District will change hands with the retirement of Mike McIntyre and the apparent strength of David Rouser as the nominee there. And across the delegation, frankly, and we're going to get into this a little bit later too, and in the General Assembly, because of the lines drawn in the last round of redistricting, there's not going to be seismic shifts here in any sense, and that's probably true for the next several cycles in North Carolina. But at the statewide level, it really has not become a nationalized race, and those lines don't matter at the statewide level. And there is, I believe, and I defer to folks in the state who are closer to it on this, but I believe that there's sort of an inversion of what we're seeing nationally. There is a, reportedly, and polls seem to bear this out, there's a sort of enthusiasm gap on the Democratic side nationally that bears with history. This is an off-year election in the second term of an incumbent president. But in North Carolina, it feels a little different, and I'm very curious how the early voting starts to look. I do know that the Hagan people are excited and are talking about the fact that absentee requests are running heavily Democratic, and that is not a historical consistency. That is different this year, and they're feeling like that is a good thing. I don't know if absentees will decide this race, but they might. It's going to be just that close. I'll stop talking for a minute.
Jim, you just touched on a couple issues that are often discussed, or that are kind of up at the forefront: ISIS, Ebola, a couple other big ones, healthcare, of course, that candidates are discussing. So let's take a look, if we can now, what are the big issues in your minds that candidates are discussing this year, and what's not being talked about as well? If you want to go ahead and get us started this time.
Well, it's been interesting to watch the North Carolina Senate race, because for a long time it looked like a North Carolina State Senate race, talking about public education. I understand all the political parts of that, but the big issues that they've got to deal with are the ISIS issue, the Ebola issue, balance of the budget issues, how do we get the economy back going. One of the downsides of all these outside groups is that it's a lot easier to run a negative ad to get people up, so we really hadn't had a tremendous amount of discussion on how are we going to get the economy going? How are we going to hire people and get them back to work? So that's been a little disappointing, but that's kind of the way modern politics has wound up being. Wish we could have a little bit higher brow discussion on that, but the way modern politics is, it's kind of like you got to get elected first, and then you start talking about something serious.
Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a little different take on that. I believe public education in North Carolina is the only thing we've got to keep us economically competitive. I think it's the foundation of why we're a state people want to be in. It's why we're an in-migration state, is because of significant investment on a sustained bipartisan basis over time. I'll be a little bit partisan and just say I believe early childhood education and the kinds of things that former Governor Hunt got started, commitment over time to strong pay for teachers, strong professional development supports for teachers, and expectations of high achievement, and the investment necessary K-12 and in higher ed and in our community colleges to make that happen. These are all vitally important. We take them for granted at our peril. I was joking a little bit earlier. It made me mad as a kid growing up in North Carolina, and I was the Duke guy, and everybody else was for Carolina except the ones that liked State and a few for Wake. And, this old thing that got under my skin a little bit, even though I tried not to let on, that, God must be a Tar Heel, or else why is the sky Carolina blue? I am worried that we've made that assumption in some broad ways. I think that we take a little too much for granted. I think we all stand on the shoulders that have come before us. And I think that's why this thing is feeling the way it is in this election. And it is about jobs and the economy. It's about uncertainty in a changing world. And the only thing we've got is to be better, faster, and smarter than the rest of the world at this point. Not our neighbors north, south, east, or west, but everybody everywhere. And so I think that's why the traction is there around education. I think it's why we haven't seen a nationalized election. But it is fundamentally about jobs and the economy. I just think all those things really do relate in the voters' minds, and there's a long history of that in the state, even though we're such an in-migration state, and there's so many people every cycle voting in North Carolina that never have in North Carolina before. On that note, just briefly, I think it's striking, but I'm not upset about it, that neither Senator Hagan, Speaker Tillis, Senator Berger, our governor, none of them are North Carolina natives. Now, I'm not saying they're not from around here. That's the nature of our state today. And I just find that kind of striking, interesting, and, irrelevant in some sense, because here we are and there they are. So I'm not upset about it, but it's really interesting to me. And this is a state where people want to be. We're only going to maintain that if we've got schools people want to send their kids to and jobs that they want their kids to have. And I think that's what people feel like this thing may be about this year.
Mike, what about you? Big issues and also issues that just have not surprisingly been discussed in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shouldn't go on too long because I kind of agree both with Frank and Jim have already said. I think the way I would put it is that direct talk about economic growth and jobs, it's unfortunate that it seems like both sides really are exhausted. So Republicans will talk about tax cuts and Democrats will talk about education. And both of those may be important. I probably lent with Jim and more on the education side. But I don't think either party really is addressing that. So that's the huge thing that I think people wish there was more of an idea of what to do. I do think that it's unusual, not unprecedented, but unusual. If Kay Hagan wins, the person who should be most scared is probably Governor McCorkle. Because, as Frank basically suggests, it's kind of a bank shot in a federal race to be talking about state issues. When I worked for Harvey Gantt, we saw that work, somewhat to my surprise, against Jesse Helms, when the race really became about values. And I think Jim is exactly right. North Carolina, when you start talking about education, it's not an issue, it's a value. And I think what the Republicans did, regardless of what particular policy we're talking about, seemed to kind of spit on that or deny that for a long time. So I think that they're in some real trouble. Even if the atmospherics of the race on Obamacare and ISIS and all these pull Tillis out, it's still extraordinary that Kay Hagan is in the lead right now. You take away Tom Tillis and put somebody else in there who was a Republican businesswoman who'd never been in the legislature, and you would not see a 3-point lead for Kay Hagan going into this. She's proven to be incredibly resilient, but it's still all about the legislature and the direction they've taken North Carolina.
Now, as you all may know, in 2011, excuse me, getting a little bit of a cough here. In 2011, the GOP-led General Assembly redrew, excuse me, redrew North Carolina's congressional, Senate, and House lines. Are redistricting politics still expected to be at play?
I'll think over
I'll step away so I can cough while you're talking for a second.
I hope she doesn't fever or anything. Yeah, the redistricting has obviously happened with Republicans, and but it's not like it's the first time we've had redistricting every 10 years. The Democrats have redistricted for 200 years before that here in North Carolina.
That's totally incorrect.
And if you're on the receiving end of it every once in a while, like a district I happen to run in, that was 91% Democratic and 9% Republican. You'll see where they have it. That's just part of American politics. Is whoever has that pen and then every decade redraw, they get to draw it. So if the Democrats get together and they win the 2020 election, they can redraw them all they want. It'd be great to have one of these fair commissions that said, sure, let's go ahead and just make sure everybody's 50-50. Actually, that would be great. You'd have a lot of competitive elections and people would do it. But you have to do it when you're in power. And I never saw the Democrats do it, and the Republicans have the power now, and I doubt they're going to do it.
Yeah. So. I think it's a fair point that Democrats did not move to an independent commission type situation. And I do want to go on record here. As I said, as I first came in, I want to say I regret voting early and often against Frank when he ran for Congress. I should have just voted against him once and just left it at that. But we were never involved. Democrats were never involved in gerrymandering. I don't know what Frank is talking about. No, but I do think that probably gerrymandering is a scary topic because of the technology these days, that both parties can really pinpoint the way they want to structure congressional districts. And that's a problem. I do think the Republicans probably went further than we did, maybe because they had more technology. David Price has a district that you cannot drive. At a certain point it stops and you have to go outside the district to come back in. So maybe they went a little too far. But I think the Democrats should not use the excuse of gerrymandering. We've got issues and challenges that go way beyond gerrymandering. And in the 2000 election, when Gore really beat Bush, if you had gone through by congressional district, we would have lost it. But if you'd given a vote for every congressional district won, Bush would have wiped out Gore. Our vote is so packed into the urban areas that we have a problem even before you get to gerrymandering, when you get to legislative House races especially. So it's a very mixed bag. I think gerrymandering is probably getting out of control, but I'm not going to say that we Democrats were clean on that. The Jim made
Jim was.
Well, a couple things on that. I guess I'd say, first of all, with regard to an independent commission, I kind of think keeping politics out of drawing lines is sort of like draft beer in a can or jumbo shrimp. Sounds great, and I'd love to get some, but not really looking forward to that happening. I'll say that maybe to take this a little different direction, because these guys have covered it really well. First of all, with respect to the technology and the nature of this last redistricting, and this is not throwing stones, I think Mac has put his finger on something, that the Republicans in charge were able to go as far and as thoroughly as they did with this because of the tools that have become available and aren't going away, by the way. People only are going to know more about us and how we behave going forward, and that's bigger than politics. The thing I guess I would say, there are still some swing districts around in North Carolina. And some of the folks listening here today may be aware that there's some attention being paid, particularly with respect to the Senate. And the former Governor Hunt, and I'd be curious as to how many folks maybe down there on campus even have heard of Jim Hunt, because, time marches on. But our four-term governor, and something of a political genius, love him, like him, or otherwise, By the way, we were a one-term state before Jim Hunt. We were Virginia. We were a state where a governor never signed a law until Hunt's last time around in office. Both of those were constitutional amendments passed by the people. But don't believe that Hunt and his team had nothing to do with either one of them. And the evolution towards executive power and somewhat away from legislative power, that's a whole other topic we're not into today. But the constitutional structure and prerogatives in North Carolina government are different than they were before Jim Hunt. Right now, this year, Hunt's been raising money from a hell of a list. He's got a great Rolodex, and he's been raising money that's the new kind of money, the non-disclosed, non-party money, and it's all about an uncoordinated, very much legal effort to swing swingable Senate seats. And it's never with the intent or expectation of taking over Democratic control of the Senate. It's about breaking the veto-proof majority that Phil Berger's got in the Senate and giving McCrory, frankly, let's put it this way, some room to move. I like to talk about basketball as being a lot like politics. You kind of get your butt on your man and move him around. And I think that's part of what this is about. We're going to try to expand the paint where folks can play in.
Jim, early on you mentioned that obviously Republicans are currently holding the supermajority in both the state House and the state Senate. Many are saying that it's very unlikely to see Democrats surpass even getting to a majority on either the state House or Senate. Is it likely, you think, that they could pick up a few seats?
I think so, and I think it's because of the wins that Matt mentioned earlier. And I don't want to try to get into race-by-race analysis. I'm not equipped to do that. Our friends down there may have some thoughts along those lines, but I know that there are very intentional targeting efforts going on around a little more than a handful of potential swing districts in the state Senate, and it's all about breaking the veto-proof majority.
Frank, Matt, what in your minds is at stake with these open General Assembly seats?
So, just what Jim said, there's some chance that the Democrats might be able to break the supermajority, veto-proof nature of one of the chambers, and both, but probably only one. And it's maybe an outside chance, but it's especially in those Raleigh, in the Wake County districts, in the Asheville districts that people are looking. Those are still the swing areas in the state that can be focused on.
Yeah, I agree with that. Wake County and Nashville are the two areas where you might see some Republican Senate losses, maybe a House seat or two.
Well, when it comes to voter makeup, age, race, men, women, what type of voter are the two parties hoping to see come out during early voting on election day? Well,
obviously the ones that they're going to support. Let me take a little jump from that. The one thing that is interesting here in North Carolina, and Mac and I have talked about this, is the rise of the independents. And really what you're seeing is people fighting for those independents right now because they've already made the decision not to be Democrat, not to be Republican. So these last few weeks of ads and a lot of Kay Hagan's targeted ads, I've seen it, I saw the debate between Renee Elmers and Clay Aiken. And Clay Aiken's being advised by your buddy Gene Connie, another Dookie. And I was looking at it, I told him later, I told Renee's people, said, there was nothing in there that wasn't already poll tested for every independent. Every single thing he said was hitting right at those independents. And because if you're at 30% of registered voters, that's a big number. And the problem I think the Republicans and the Democrats hadn't figured out is how do you prevent them from becoming 50%? And when the independents become 50%, they're already causing a lot of havoc right here. So almost everything's targeted at those independents right now, I think, because they got to get them, and they're the ones that might do this at the end.
Well, along those lines of kind of tactics and that sort of thing, what are both parties doing to kind of try to encourage voter turnout?
Well, the Democrats are going to try to replicate to the extent possible what the Obama people have established on the ground in North Carolina. And, it's both. It's trying to get independent swing voters out. It's also trying to get your base. You got to do both. This will not be a base election in the sense that Kay Hagan can depend on a kind of Obama-type electorate to appear. That's not going to happen. So she's been taking some solace in that she's doing better among seniors than expected, and she has a wide margin among women. So it's really a both-and situation where the campaigns unfortunately have to focus on their base voters and on the swings. To follow what Frank was saying about the independents, I think that's key. Now, independents are not necessarily moderate. They're not necessarily centrist. Sometimes they can just be Republicans, reliable liberals, and conservatives who simply don't like the party. But there's something going on in North Carolina, and I do think that, again, this may be the Democratic advantage in years to come for Roy Cooper, especially against McCrory, that the Republicans seem to have closed themselves off to the idea of a big tent. And, they had an opportunity to take over and to really show they can govern. And they're blowing that opportunity pretty quickly. So for the Democrats, our problem, or I'm no longer a Democratic consultant, but I would say for the Democratic future, the key is to understand, as Frank said, people in North Carolina aren't going to want to hear about how the Democrats can do it alone, and they don't want to really hear about how the Republicans are going to do it alone. The Big Tent is the way to go in North Carolina. Again, it doesn't have to be moderate centrist necessarily, but you have to be open to new people and new ideas. And in that sense, I think that's what the Republicans really have to worry about. Because in the end, you can gerrymander all you want, but demography is not, gerrymandering is not destiny. Sooner or later, the demography of the state, the way the state's changing, and the way Latino voters might become a voting force, and it's getting younger, and younger people have different views, that's going to play very big, if not so much in this election, in succeeding elections. It's going to get to be a bigger and bigger issue.
Thank you. Jim, any? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess the only thing I might add to that, and I want to fact check with folks here who were also present for another talk that some of us heard a couple weeks back. We had a very smart woman from a little school in Chapel Hill who was up here, and she runs a demography center over there, and was telling us that we're very, I think this is true, and had heard this anyway, I haven't followed it, that we're likely, almost certain to get 1 and possibly 2 seats next time. Am I making that up? So that means the congressional lines are going to have to be redrawn after the next census, simply to remake this delegation and grow it by as many as 2. And I think the points Mac makes are very well taken. My mom likes to say that she thought she worked best under pressure until she realized she only works under pressure. And I hope that will be an outcome of what we see with the growth of independent-minded voters in North Carolina and actually nationally. It's going back to national for just a moment. We're seeing some really interesting things play out due to currently sitting independent senators who may caucus differently next year, depending on what goes on, and this race in Kansas with an independent who basically supplanted the Democrat in the challenge to sitting Senator Pat Roberts. And that's going to matter as we get into December and see where we stand going into next year on control of the U.S. Senate. And by the way, just a related point there that's a little off the question. It's interesting that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsed Mr. Tillis over Ms. Hagan, when in fact she's been with them on more things than he has, and they're in fact for comprehensive immigration reform. That's not about Kay Hagan or Tom Tillis. That's about control of the Senate. So there's a lot at stake in this race that folks are interested in beyond the borders of our great state.
Thank you. Well, we can get back to some questions from me in just a moment, but let's go ahead and turn to the audience. We'll start here at Duke. Does anyone have any questions?
What about Howard Cobal's seat? There's a lot of interest at Duke about that.
Yeah, I don't know the particulars of it. This institute, we had one of our graduates who ran in that primary, so we were somewhat familiar with what's going on. Laura Field, what I understand, she's raised a lot of money. That district is going to be, it's a Republican district plus 7, something like that, plus the 8. I haven't heard about any internal polls or anything. Most people think that he's going to keep that, and Rouser will pick up McIntyre's seat, so there'll be 10 Republican seats. Which, if you told me that 35 years ago, when there were 2, it was just unbelievable. But I don't know. I haven't heard anything too much.
No, I think Laura's done an excellent job as a first-time candidate, and she's raised an impressive amount for a first-time candidate. If she had the support, if it was a bigger Democratic here, and she had the national support of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And I think Walker, her opponent, is very, very vulnerable. But the question for her in the closing days, she's just got on the air, and that'll be a big if. But that would be the one that I would say, if there had been a better headwind for her, we might see a switch. We still may see a switch, because my understanding, and I don't want, Frank doesn't have to say this, there is great discontent with Walker in Republican circles. And I think if he wins, he will be challenged immediately by somebody in that district. And when you hear that, if that contagion gets out, you could see Laura sneak in the end. She's the outside bet for any Democratic pickup here. Seems unlikely, because as Frank says, that district used to be an under 40 Democratic performance district, and it averages a little above 40 now. But she's done a really good job, and since Senator Berger's son lost, there's some fracturing in the Republican ranks. How much is unclear.
Jim?
Only thing I'll add on that, since I'm a Methodist preacher's kid, by the way, a Duke-trained Methodist preacher, I'll say that I've lived everywhere, including that district. You asked me where we're going, I'll tell you where we've been. That's an old blues line, Reggie. But so I'll tell you a story about 1982 and 1984. In 1982, a man named Robin Britt won the 6th District. He succeeded a long-serving Democratic member named Richardson Pryor, who had held that seat for many years. 2 years, that was an off-year election, so a pickup by a Democrat under a Republican president. 2 years later, in the Reagan re-election landslide, who won that seat? Mr. Howard Coble won that seat. 2 years after that, Britt tried again, and on a recount lost by about 60 votes in 1986. So first of all, every vote does count. And secondly, I think Mac makes some really interesting points. Now, the 6th was a little different then. The lines have moved around, but I've had Mr. Coble tell me twice in relatively recent history, since the redistricting, that's a district that could be quite friendly for a moderate Democrat. So I think with a different national dynamic and a little different turnout dynamic, it might look like a very different situation there as much as anywhere else in the state.
Anyone in D.C. that would like to ask a question?
I'd like to make a comment. Stephen Moore and Art Laffer they published a book called The Wealth of States. And in that book, it documents there's been a almost $6 billion wealth transfer from New York State to North Carolina, and from Florida, almost a $2 billion transfer from wealth from Florida. So you're having a lot of people that are moving into the state that are not native North Carolinians, that weren't born there. And that obviously will have an effect on this election and future elections, going forward. How big of an effect will that be? That's the question.
Y'all, could y'all hear Wayne?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't y'all go first?
Well, I mean, I think that that's talking about the same kind of demographic shift that we've already talked about. A lot of people who've been moving into North Carolina have not been firebrand liberals by any stretch, but they probably are the type of people who would not be comfortable with the Jesse Helms republicanism that worked here for so long. So I think there is some slight advantage there too for the Democrats. But let me shift a little bit to say, Frank and I have talked a lot about this, the problem for the Democrats going forward, and certainly I think Moore and Laffer would chime in here, is even though it looks socially and culturally like we've got some advantages going forward in North Carolina as well as the nation, the fiscal issue of how to pay for our visions and our dreams is still, Democrats don't have a really good answer, especially with low economic growth, which keeps bringing taxes to the fore. So Republicans do have some resources here, and for those new people moving down to North Carolina from New York or wherever, while they might be a little bit used to higher taxes levels, they're not going to be the type people who necessarily are going to be for a lot of liberal welfare state schemes. So the Democrats do have some real issues. The interesting thing, I don't know if Frank noticed this, Moore and Laffer have tried to have real influence in the state Senate here in New York John Hood of the John Locke Foundation has a very critical piece of the new book in the more recent national reviews. So that their kind of farther libertarian view, which say get rid of the income tax and go to the sales tax, I think has caused some quaking in Republican circles, and there's some conflict there. But I think they're exactly right to talk about the demographic change that's come to North Carolina. And again, I don't think it benefits Helms-like Republicans, but I think there are people who are voters who could be open to the right kind of Republican appeal.
Was there anything?
No.
I was going to say, kind of along those lines, that what's the next step? How do you prepare for this kind of new generation of voters of kind of transplants, I guess you could say, coming into North Carolina?
Well, I'm not so sure people who've been in North Carolina all their life are going to be able to prepare for it, because I think they're just going to take over. And we see it at all the college levels. These institutes that we put together to get people to run for office, I'm telling you right now, 50% of them are independent, and they're coming from other states, like all over, very bright. But they really are turned off by the Democrats because they spend too much. They're turned off by the Republicans because they get too much into the bedroom issues. And they, I mean, at age 18 and 19, they've already said, we're done with that. If that 50% cohort keeps going up and they get to be 20, 25, 30, and they stay like that, I'm not sure it's a question of whether we prepare for it or whether we just accept them kicking all the old people to the sideline and taking over, because they also are mad because they don't see real big problems being solved. And they're problem solvers. They want to have answers. They want to get done. They want to get a job. They want to raise their kids. And they're kind of sick of all the stuff that we baby boomers love to fight about, because we'll fight about it just because it's fun until the end. And these young people are sick of it. They want to see someone make a decision, get it done. So I don't think you prepare for it as much as just watch them take over.
Jim, you kind of feel the same way? Start eventually
Yeah, I
kind of
think those
seeing
are all,
this.
yeah, those are terrific points, and I wouldn't add much to that at all. I will say to my friend Frank, you started to there, I want you to get in a commercial for the institute you're running. I'm excited about it. And I'm glad to hear you've got smart folks no matter where they're from. We need them.
Good.
Well, he won't do this, but we're happy to have Frank teaching at the Sanford School of Public Policy, teaching political leadership and training. And I show up every
This is
once
an
in a while.
outrage.
Well, I show up every once in a while to balance him off.
We're looking for dude guys like you, Jim.
How are the campaigns being affected by changes in the election laws, and how do you see that playing out 2 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a Citizens United world, post-Citizens United world, where the campaigns are in danger of being dwarfed by the independent spending. And I guess along the theme that Frank has already said, I'm to the point, I certainly would like to see some campaign finance reform. I've written on that before, but I really think we're in a world where we might just have to accept that that's where we're going. And it's too bad, because I do think that whether you're Republican or Democratic, you want the accountability to be way more directly on the backs of the people who are running.
And how about by the voting rules? Changes in voting rules?
We will see on that. From a Democratic perspective, I think the most important thing is now for Democrats, I would advise not to be poor-mouthing the rules and saying it's going to cheat us, as much as to say we're not going to take it, and we're going to show that that our voters can still get out. That's difficult given some of the rules, but I think that it's again probably something we need to keep on fighting in the courts to a certain extent. But we've just got to double and triple our vote turnout efforts, and that would be the great story. That in fact it didn't work, and I worry that we don't want to. We can't send messages to voters that it's unfair, don't come out and vote. We really need to say we're not going to take it. Now, granted, there's not even early voting in New York and Pennsylvania. It's restrictive here, but not as restrictive as in some other states on the face of it. But unfortunately, I think there was a clear tone of, if not racial animus, at least motivation to go after the African American vote and the younger vote to turn that down. Now, whether it's unconstitutional or not, you got to leave that to the courts. But I think the Republicans may rue the day that they went as far as they did in some of the techniques. At least I'm hoping that that will be the story coming out of 2016.
I just want to talk about the money part. The guys who are doing, the women who are doing these big expenditures, they'll do it until it doesn't work because they're business people. And they're not doing this because it's fun or they think it's important. But if they get to the point where they see their efforts not working as well, or they're not turning the vote, or they're not making a difference, that's when you'll start to see them kind of peel off on it. But until that time, it could be $200 million for the next Senate race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I figure that Hagen-Tillis record's going to be broken big time in 2016. So.
Jim?
I regretfully agree that that's probably correct.
Will you get another question for us from your DC audience?
So watching Morning Joe this morning, they were talking about the Hagen-Tillis race and said that one of the reasons it is so easy to have outside money coming in is because it's a generic R versus a generic D and a pretty mixed electorate. Is that a fair way to look at North Carolina? Is that the right narrative? What would you guys kind of come back at that statement with?
I saw the same thing you did this morning. I would dissent from that to the extent that if it were just a generic R versus generic D, Hagen would be behind. I understand the point that they were getting at, but the key right now has been that Tillis is not a generic R. He is the Speaker of the House, and he's been stigmatized by what the reputation of the General Assembly. So that I think the other Southern races are better examples of generic R's and D's, where it's simply the national conditions and national winds are playing out. Here, there's a different counter wind coming at the state level. So I would disagree to the extent that I certainly would say that Tom Tillis, unfortunately for him, is not a generic R. If he were a generic R, businessman or woman with no association with the General Assembly, as I said before, I think you'd see him up by maybe 5 to 7 points.
I would agree with every bit of that, and I guess my only add would be that this money can go anywhere. A big reason it's coming to North Carolina is the race is doggone close, and Hagen's holding on to the lead.
Anyone else there, Jim, who has a question?
Can you talk a little bit about candidates' reluctance to have the president involved in their campaigning, and how that is playing either a positive or a negative in their campaigns?
I will affiliate myself with the remarks of Frank Hill, say that politics is a game played by people wanting to look at what works. And just like dark money is flowing because people feel like it works, if folks thought the president would help them, they'd have him right next to them every day.
I guess we really saw that come up in the Hagen and Tillis debates time and time again.
Well, President Obama wanted to be on the ballot. He said, make no mistake about it, my policies are on the ballot, and Kay Hagen voted for him. Mary Landrieu voted for him. Mark Warner voted. All the Democrats voted for him. And for some reason, I don't know what he was thinking and whether he thought everybody was so happy with what he's doing right now that he thought that was a good thing. But if that's not a clear message, that's just 10-earedness, I think, on the part of the president. I'm not sure why he did that, but I don't think the Democratic senators were real happy about that, to be reminded that they had voted for all these things that 65% of the American people don't like.
Yeah, yes.
I think I'll reach back to history again and tell a story. So in the fall of 2000, I don't have much of a vanity wall, y'all, but this one is on it. I've got a picture with Hunt and Clinton, and they were both coming to the end of long careers in elective office. They had been friends and allies for a long time, and so it was a lunch up here in town honoring Jim Hunt, and Clinton was the speaker. Now, what it was was a Democrat Governors Association fundraiser for Mike Easley, but Easley wasn't here. He didn't travel a lot. Y'all may remember that. But so I was hanging around staffing the thing, off the clock, by the way, of course. I was appropriately off the clock. But we got through the line of everybody getting their picture with the president and the governor, and they had all gone, the folks had gone on into the room to sit down for lunch. And I got to walk up the hall with Clinton and Hunt. And Hunt's just ebullient. He's bragging on Clinton and all the great things he's done and asking him how he's feeling about Al Gore. And Clinton was mad. He was hot. He was pissed off. He said, I don't know why he won't talk more about the good things we've done. I don't know. Well, y'all may remember that Gore didn't have Clinton campaign with him a whole lot. I think it's in the nature of any president to feel that he could go in there and help. So I don't really blame Obama for it personally. I think a 10-year maybe, but I think everybody, what Gore I think was trying to do was distinguish himself some in what was going to be and proved to be a pretty close, pretty tight race with a compassionate conservative coming out of Texas who was going to change Washington, all that stuff, right? And there was still the overhang from Monica. So there were reasons Gore didn't, and they didn't get on real good. You know, by then these guys were kind of tired of each other. That's personal. That's not relevant to today, really. But I do think these things kind of translate, and I think any given president probably wants to get his blood up and get out there and be part of the fray. But right now, not too many phones ringing on that score down at 1600, I don't think.
I would just say that so again, even though I'm a Morning Joe watcher and I enjoy the show, somewhat contrary to what they were saying today, I think Kay Hagan has done a very good job, and I think she was very underestimated in terms of her general resilience and how she's handled the Obama issue, which, as Jim and Frank say, it's just standard knowledge that that's going to be a problem for her. And so I think she's shown a lot of resilience and grit that I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of Republicans didn't think she had in handling it. It's a tough issue, especially the 6-year midterm election of remember it that of 2006 when we had that advantage against President Bush. So I think I would just tip my hat to Kay Hagan and say she really has done way better than a lot of people expected.
Any questions here? Any other questions? All right, Jim, any other questions in DC?
Yeah, can you give us an update on the state of the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina?
An update on Moral Monday, guys. I think Moral Monday is pretty well alive and well. I think it's probably channeling in the direction of some of the things that Mac talked about a minute ago. It's not about the rules aren't fair. It's about we're not going to take this. And I think it's been one of the questions we had here is what's different in the run-up to this election than things in the past. I think that feels different, y'all. I mean, if apathy is part of what we complain about in American politics, this is the opposite. So I think it's alive. I think it's right on. I think people are mad for the right reasons, and I hope that's not too partisan a statement in this setting.
Do you feel like it's making Moral Monday, clearly in North Carolina, especially in the Triangle area, you can't help but hear it and kind of experience it and see it. But do you think it's kind of making a national impact, or is it kind of just more of a state thing, would you say?
You want me to go and then you can contradict Jim
at
the same time?
Mm-hmm.
I tend to agree with Jim. I think that if Tillis loses, Moral Monday and Reverend Barber deserve a lot of credit for his scalp. I think that it's not that people in North Carolina are in favor of the agenda of Moral Monday, but we were talking about those new voters and those young voters. Just to turn on the television set and to look in the newspaper and to see thousands of people protesting, people getting arrested down at the State General Assembly, and especially with the overlay of teachers being involved and not getting pay raises, that's had a really stigmatizing effect that I think if Tom Tillis was probably sitting here, he's a good enough politician to know that he suffered from that. So in a negation kind of way, I think the Moral Monday movement has been very powerful. It also has helped to establish a stronger liberal base, which is still of people who self-identify as liberal in the state. It's still only about a quarter of the electorate. But when I used to run races, be involved in races, it was below 20%. So I think the Moral Monday has been a great success. I'm not suggesting that the Moral Monday is a movement that could lead to take power in North Carolina, but I think it, as a negation and a stigmatizing effect, it's been very successful. And they probably, the Reverend Barber can take some satisfaction. And I would also say that Reverend Barber's strategy of whatever people would like to say about Reverend Barber, making it about moral Monday, not political Monday, and not having a bunch of elected Democratic politicians at the helm of the movement, it's been very powerful.
Well, it's had some effect. I don't think it's national. I think it's pretty much here in North Carolina. Some parts of North Carolina might not even know what it is. You see a lot of it in Raleigh. But it also has anytime you have an effort like that, you tend to also spawn a countervailing force. And there are a lot of people on the conservative side that have done a lot of work to pretty much say that some of these claims are incorrect. Like Kay Hagan's gotten 4 Pinocchios from Washington Post, New York Times, saying that $500 million has been cut. And then you get into all the minutia about whether that's cut from a continuation budget or the regular budget, and you can't win that debate because you're conservative. But as you start chopping away at some of these issues, if you didn't know any better, you'd think that North Carolina was number 10 in the nation in teacher salaries before the mean old Republicans took up and slashed everything, and now we're 46th. When I was up in Washington, underneath Democratic governors and legislature, they were 49th. So we're actually moving up, if you want to look at it that way.
Under Governor Hunt, we got to 23.
We can throw numbers all around. But the moral majority, moral money people might.
That's a good one.
They're doing what they're free to do, but then you're also probably going to have more people coming up on the other side and saying, let's just get the facts straight, maybe, and that might dissipate some of the energy. It's great to talk about stuff, but if you have to really be accountable for it being true, sometimes that falls apart in politics.
I'm going to take this opportunity to, now that I've talked bad about draft beer in a can and jumbo shrimp, I'm going to give a little ad for both. This is a little different take on gerrymandering and redistricting. I think it's bad for small d democracy. I think when you've got caucuses in the legislature of whichever stripe that answer only to like-minded folks, that only worry about a primary challenge coming from their respective more extreme right or left, that's bad for government. It's bad for governance, and it's bad for self-governing republics. I don't know who's going to be the standard bearer for that. Politicians react out of fear as much as anything, so I don't know who's going to get scared enough that somebody's so mad that that'll turn them out, because it really is just an entrenching tool for both sides, and it sort of means the parties, through their official spokesmen and caucuses and all the things that sort of roll up to messaging, aren't talking to the sort of middle of the country, the middle of the people, the middle of the state. And if the middle is growing, if disaffection with the two extremes is growing, and if a desire for an independent sort of take on good government is growing, something's going to have to give. And it's going to have to come from people brave enough to lose under the current structure, because they get challenged in a primary and November becomes irrelevant. So, and that's not about statewide elections. Obviously, that's much different. And I don't know quite where I'm going with it, except just to say I think it's a bad thing for the parties themselves to go overboard on this stuff. I think that's part of what's playing out right now.
Let me pick up on what Jim's saying, because I think Frank and I have actually talked about this in a number of cases. I do think when I was a political consultant, I would have never advised, as Jim has already said, going for an independent commission when we were in power. But I think what you're sensing in North Carolina, we've already talked about the demographic change, the move to independence, is that the party that catches on, or the party candidates who catch on to this new field and would actually, I don't want to sound biblical, but actually walk away a little bit from power to gain more power, will be the ones who I think are going to be rewarded. So, one of the best partisan strategies in this atmosphere in North Carolina is to be bipartisan or multi-partisan. That's the paradox. So that I think that what Jim is really putting his finger on something that we've had years of Democratic rule here. Jim and I would argue that they were great times, mainly. Frank's party's had a chance, and they seem to be now messing up on that. And it seems now who is going to move in a new direction that's not going to be so power-driven may actually gain more power through doing that. So I think it's a very interesting point that Jim talked about. And I think, things like an independent commission or having your cabinet be not just have Republicans and Democrats in your cabinet, but having independents in your cabinet would be something that would be very interesting for people to talk about.
I don't think we need to go very far to find that candidate. Kay Hagan hadn't run one ad yet that says she's a Democrat. She's the most moderate senator. She's voted 50% of the time. I mean, you're seeing, if you're looking at the poll numbers, I imagine they've done the same thing. She's run an independent campaign, really. I mean, if she'd come out and said, I supported Obamacare, I've done all this, all that, it wouldn't be this close. So you might see, she might be the first real independent candidate right now.
Yeah.
As far as
My only thing is that my only point, I agree with Frank, except for the fact that independent is not, it's grown so large, it's not just a proxy for moderate anymore. There are independent liberals, there are independent radicals, there are independent conservatives who simply do not want to be besmirched by the party label. And that's what both party leaderships have got to understand and seem, I think we are picking up on that because we're not in power. That's just the advantage of not being in power. But the big tent is really the where to go.
All right, well, what an insightful conversation that we've gotten a chance to have today, from Jim in DC to Frank and Mac here. Really appreciate your time. Thank you all so much, and thank you to our audience, both DC and here in Durham. Just a reminder to everyone, we have our final installment of the election series that's going to take place 3 weeks from today, November 13th. Gives everyone time to go out and vote, and we'll feature Professors Nick Carnes, Sunshine Hilgis, and they're going to be joined by pollster Neil Newhouse, and they're going to discuss all those election outcomes. Should be interesting. All right. Well, thank you all again.